I'd like to call this Assembly Committee on Housing and Homelessness to order. We are noticed today from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Let's go ahead and do a round of introductions on the dais, starting with Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson. Daniel Bowden. Fortson Barton.
Felix Rivera.
Suzanne LaGrance.
Randy Solt.
And then do we have any Assembly members on the phone?
Jamie Allard.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Allard. Do we have any other members on the phone? Okay. As I understand it, I believe Mr. Constant will be joining us on the phone soon, and then we'll be here in person around noon. Okay. Welcome, everyone. And actually, before I start speaking, can we go ahead and get the presentation up, Mr. Turner? Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone, to this regular Housing and Homelessness Committee meeting. Next slide, please. We have a huge agenda today, starting with 4 individuals signed up for initial audience participation, quick updates on various Assembly-approved appropriations, and another quick update on the Centennial Park Campground Demobilization, which is still set for September 30th, and, of course, emergency shelter. I'm going to take a few minutes now to set the stage for this meeting, lay out my hopes and expectations, and talk about next steps. Next slide, please. And my apologies, Travis, the one behind us isn't working, so only that one is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just a tech issue?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, that's unfortunate. So most of today's meeting will be centered around emergency shelter, and specifically, I'm going to verbalize most everything on the slide, so don't worry too much about it. Most of today's meeting will be centered around emergency shelter and specifically about facilities that can be stood up by October 1, which I'll speak more on later. We will start with the presentation of the Emergency Shelter Task Force preliminary recommendations. We will then move on to an update from the administration's only emergency shelter recommendation, which has the possibility of being turned on by October 1, which is the mini grants option. I will then pause the discussion on emergency shelter to go to final audience participation for approximately 20 minutes, going through the sign-up list. We will then use the remainder of the time to go back to the emergency shelter discussion so I can get a sense of the Assembly, the administration, using a simple Excel worksheet that will help all of us to visualize the problem we are trying to solve today. I think it's important to have a basic understanding of the situation we are in and the timeline that led us to this meeting today. I make no political commentary with this timeline, just the facts. Although we could begin this timeline much earlier than June of 2022 and include other key points beyond what will be presented, this condensed timeline sufficiently tells the story and keeps this meeting in a solutions-oriented and collaborative space. Next slide, please. So, the story begins on June 2nd when the mayor announced the closure of the Sullivan Arena as a COVID-19 mass care site. On July 24th, the Assembly received an email notification from the municipal manager regarding Centennial Park Campground, which was the first official communication regarding the change in status at Centennial. On July 12th, 3 Assembly members, Mr. Perez-Vidia, Mr. Voland, and myself, put forward a 5-pronged plan to address what we dubbed as the humanitarian crisis on our streets. We will be getting updates on all the parts of this plan today. The Assembly approved 4 of the components of this plan on July 26th. Most relevant, the Assembly approved forward funding for both family and single adult emergency sheltering. One of the provisions of what the Assembly approved on July 26th required the administration to present their emergency shelter plan to the Housing and Homelessness Committee on August 17th. Next slide, please. When the administration failed to meet this requirement, that same day, the Assembly approved a resolution creating the Emergency Shelter Task Force and set a deadline of September 21 for the task force to come up with preliminary recommendations for review at the Housing and Homelessness Committee. The task force would be convened by the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and members of the administration were required to be invited to the meetings, a requirement which was met at the first meeting of the task force on August 22nd and all future task force meetings. On August 31st, the administration released its emergency shelter plan. The Assembly reviewed the administration's plan on September 7th, a day after the task force began its outreach on the initial properties under consideration under their separate plan, which at the time were the Alex Hotel, Arctic Recreation Center, former Bear Inn, former Benson DMV, the old Sherwin-Williams, and America's Best Value Inn. As the task force will speak to later, this list changed on a weekly, if not daily, basis. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, do you know there's no slides up here?
I do know that, ma'am. Fortunately, this projector is not working. On September 9th, so we do have the one behind you, but otherwise I am verbalizing everything on the slides. On September 9th, I sent a letter to the task force requesting they consider the Golden Lion in lieu of using the Spenard and Fairview rec centers. On September 14th, the task force achieved consensus on Tier 1 recommendations, which are properties that can be turned on by October 1. The task force released a written report on their preliminary recommendations to the Assembly and Administration on September 16th. That same day, the task force began its outreach efforts focused on two of the recommendations in the report, the former Golden Lion and the Dempsey. That brings us to today. Next slide, please. I'd like to clarify a few points made in a lot of the emails we've received. First, I want to express my appreciation for everyone who has engaged in this process so far and reached out to the Assembly and Administration with your thoughts, concerns, and ideas. To start, the task force is not the Anchorage Assembly. The task force is not the mayor. The task force, although created by the Assembly, represents itself and its own views. So the preliminary recommendations by the task force are exactly that and do not represent Assembly recommendations. In fact, there are no Assembly recommendations yet. That is what we are here to do today. In addition, I believe there might have been an expectation that we are voting today. That is not the case. As I will share later, a vote will happen on Monday, September 26th. Next slide, please. To get to success on September 26th, we need to have a successful meeting today. That means we must, at least for the next 2 hours, set aside whatever political animus we may have, avoid pointing fingers, and any actions that might disrupt the life-saving work we need to do today. My expectations of this committee, the administration, and the public is that we find a way to collaborate and get to yes. Because 350 unsheltered individuals are relying on the work we do today. Let me be clear, I have no power to prevent what I would call unhelpful distractions to our work. I am simply setting an expectation and urge my colleagues, the public, and administration to meet it. As a clear caveat, I do have the power and will take swift action to deal with any actual disruptions to this meeting. Please do not force me to take such action. My hope is that during this discussion, my colleagues will be able to clearly visualize who we are doing this work for and who might be impacted by the work we do, many of which are here today. Keep those visuals in your head. I hope they will drive us to make the best possible decisions for all members of our community. People are relying on us to make good and timely decisions. Which brings us to the focus of today's committee meeting, October 1. There are two prime reasons for this deadline. First, it is getting colder every night, and legally, the municipality must provide emergency shelter. And two, Centennial Park Campground will be closing on September 30th. So while we could spend all of our committee meeting today talking about the Navigation Center, which would not be available for partial occupancy until November, or the portable buildings, which also have a November timeline for implementation, or the Northway Mall, none of these possibilities are viable to meet the impending deadline of October 1. The only viable options are MOA-owned facilities, expansion of current existing facilities, and possible mini-grant locations. To achieve this goal, I will be providing much more direction than normal and placing myself on top of the queue regularly to efficiently move this conversation forward. I thank you in advance for your lead. Next slide, please. I want to thank members of the administration and the Emergency Shelter Task Force for putting ideas out there, regardless of how unpopular they may be. I hope it is clear to everyone that there are no easy or simple solutions. I appreciate any parties that are willing to step into the fray and try to find solutions. Last, I want to end with 2 milestones I see as next steps. First is the release of appropriations, contracts, or any other official documents on Friday, September 23rd, necessary to achieve the goal of providing shelter to 350 individuals by October 1. These documents will be the sole focus of a special meeting scheduled for Monday, September 26th, from 6 to 8 p.m. in these chambers, where I hope we will be able to vote and approve our plan for emergency sheltering beginning on October 1. To be clear, this doesn't end the work, as the task force is scheduled to continue looking at possible Tier 2 options, which are options which can be turned on within 90 days, for the administration and assembly to consider. That is a discussion for a future date. All right, we can go ahead and take down the slides. And just for the public's information, there are a variety of documents that are on the Assembly's committee website. So if you go to muni.org/assembly, find the Housing and Homelessness Committee, you will find the presentations that we just went through and a variety of other documents there. Okay, let's go ahead and get into initial audience participation. Okay. We have 4 individuals signed up. So we'll go ahead and start with Mr. Oliva. Welcome.
Ron Oliva, I was here at the last meeting. I hope you got my handout. I submitted an invoice for $250,000, which the municipality shorted me on a sale of a property across from the Brother Francis shelter, with the promise of buying my parcels, adding that amount to the next purchase. They didn't purchase the property through a multitude of issues, but I would like to get that $250,000. I have the documentation. I haven't sued for the money, but all of you know no one has been more impacted by the homeless than the Leyva family, the Grub State business, the staff, and the clients. We're leaving because the impact has been so egregious and negative that you cannot measure or alleviate the impact of having a homeless shelter next to you. And if you track the Sullivan Arena or wherever you had a homeless shelter, it left nothing but disaster. And not only economic loss, the problem grew. It's growing now because you had 2 forms of government, the assembly and the mayor. Oh, it's sad. But so I didn't receive a check for the $250,000. I'd like to get that to make things up, because the homeless led to a conviction for disinfecting. I have a level 4 in sewage treatment. I got convicted, I got sentenced, I got fined. But the worst result of that was a plagiarized article on Google, which basically stated, business tycoon, former politician, arrested for poisoning homeless encampment. Now, I cut 2 dead trees on my driveway easement, and the landowner sued me, and he was awarded $117,000 for cutting down a beetle kill and a maybe tree. Sounds ridiculous. Appealed it. Ended up, unfortunately, losing the appeals, and now I owe $320,000 for 2 dead trees because the jury Googled me, and I can't purge that from my reputation. Thus, they're going to foreclose and sell my properties. So I need the $250,000 to pay for 2 dead trees caused by a plagiarized article about disaffecting the most vulnerable, to protect the most vulnerable population, the homeless, and kids' lunchbox. Now, you can read anything you like, but the truth is, I've always helped the homeless and will continue to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva. I forgot to mention this earlier, but if members want to get in the queue, please just wave me down or text me if I'm not looking at you. For folks on the phone, if you can also text me as well. So I don't see anyone in the queue for you. Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Okay, Felix, when can I expect a check
Thank you, Mr. Oliva. Next, we have Mr. Louis Embriani. Is Mr. Embriani here? Okay. Is there any instructions to unmute him, or do you got that? Okay, got it. So, Mr. Embriani, you will be unmuted in a second. If you could introduce yourself, you will have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect, thank you. For the record, my name is Louis Embriani. I was just calling, I was unable to finish watching the meeting that took place for the Emergency Task Force on the 19th, but I did listen to what the comments were on the 14th about specifically Dempsey Anderson and Ben Boki. A lot of the comments that were made were just not, I don't believe that they were fully informed. I don't think that they have the knowledge of what goes on at those ice rinks or how the allocation of ice and the booking of ice works. So a lot of the information that was presented was incomplete. Some of the things that they missed was they were talking about how South Anchorage rinks have openings, but it wouldn't be enough to fill the void for Boki and Dempsey. Boki and Dempsey are at the very beginning of the season. The ice allocation has gone out, and those additional ice sheets will be picked up by teams looking for games, looking for more practices and other rinks. The impact that closing Dempsey would have on not only the hockey community, but Anchorage as a whole would be tremendous. There are tournaments that are already booked for that rink that cannot be moved because of the lack of ice. We have teams flying up from the lower 48 that expect to play indoors at our wonderful facilities so that we can bring in some profit to Anchorage during the winter months. Also, Dempsey Anderson was not noted that it is the home of girls high school hockey. It's also the home of our sled hockey team. So that's where our disabled participants, they participate in our sport, and that is really the only place that we have that can accommodate that type of play. Not to mention it is AHA's main building, that's the Anchorage Hockey Association, where they have almost 1,500 youth members that participate in the sport on a daily basis. I mean, that ice book is bringing in revenue. It is a staple to these kids. Closing that would really harm not only the kids, but also the families of those kids. And I won't even get into the roaming issue with only a fence blocking Dempsey to the West High track. There was a fence up at the Sullivan Arena, and we still had people that would come over the fence, around the fence, through the fence, and get into vehicles, get into the building when they shouldn't have been there, even with security. And then you're adding it to a school. It is not a good spot. It is very harmful, and it should be moved, Dempsey and Boki, from a Tier 1 location to a Tier 2 location, or completely removed from the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Embriani. And next we have... Thanks, folks. So it's just going to take us longer to get through this if we clap after each person speaking. So next we have Shawnway Fitzgerald. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Shawnee Fitzgerald, and I was raised in Alaska and currently live in West Anchorage. My husband and I have 4 children, one currently attending West High. And I'm speaking regarding the current plan of possibly using the Dempsey Anderson Ice Arena as an emergency homeless shelter. I need to tell you how strongly myself, fellow parents, and other Turnagain neighbors oppose this plan. It is short-sighted, ill-conceived, and puts Anchorage school children at risk. I will ask all of you, have you actually walked the campus of Dempsey Anderson, Romig, and West High? I have hundreds, if not thousands of times. Dempsey virtually sits on the campus of both of these schools. They are completely connected. In the task force document, they outline concerns for proposing certain buildings over others. Besides Dempsey and others, they also propose Denina and Egan, but say the proximity to downtown is not favorable. Also, the Sullivan, which was already a shelter, now they say is not favorable because of its proximity to Chester Creek. If location is part of the evaluation criteria, then please tell me how putting a shelter within feet of 2 schools is somehow a plan that could even be considered. Not only are these schools occupied literally with thousands of children, the walking paths between these campuses and Dempsey are utilized every single day. Since pictures are worth 1,000 words, I'd like to show you a few. Here's a picture taken yesterday of some kids walking on their way back to school from lunch. There are literally hundreds of kids who walk these routes daily, before school, after school, and at lunch. Here is Romick and Dempsey. You can see the proximity. They are literally only separated by feet. The only thing separated Dempsey and Romick campuses is a chain link fence which must remain open for easement and bus routes. Here's the Romick parking lot. There are active classroom windows you see, as well as staff parking. Here's the back of Dempsey and the West High football field. You can actually see the scoreboard right there through the tree. I more than understand the gravity of the situation and needing an alternative to Centennial Campground, but I need to stress that the taking of Dempsey is not the solution. Heartbreakingly, with the unhoused population comes mental health issues, alcohol, drug issues. From a safety standpoint, how is it even fathomable for housing this population and students together? How are you going to keep the students in their classrooms from witnessing questioning activities right outside their windows? What are you going to do about the hundreds of students who use this as a walking path to and from school and at lunch? How are you going to guarantee the safety of all of these children? Please don't tell me that Dempsey was used prior, at the beginning of the pandemic. Then I will remind you, there was no students in these buildings at that time. All the schooling at that juncture was online. I can't understand why the Sullivan that was used in the past is still vacant, isn't the #1 choice, or why the Golden Lion, which the community also owns, isn't the choice. Whatever the reason is, the solution cannot be the taking of Dempsey.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, I realize that. So I have been reminded that this is a business meeting. We are trying to get, in the end, to recommendations and a plan, and which I know that's what you all want. You want a plan that doesn't include Dempsey. So if you want that, please stop disrupting this meeting. Okay, next I have Marla Thompson. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry for the delay. First, I want to thank Randy for responding to my emails. He is the only one who has, so thank you very much. Okay. My name is Marla Thompson. I've lived in Anchorage for 30 years, and I have a son that goes to West High, and I am not in favor of Dempsey being used as a homeless shelter. It's connected to Romick and High, and it backs up to West. It's unsafe. You asked at the beginning that we visualize what it was like, what it would be like. Well, we've increased crime because we were in the Sullivan Arena. It's unsafe. My son is active. He plays baseball and hockey, and we spend a lot of time at the indoor and outdoor fields and rinks that share the parking lot of Sullivan. We saw drugs, drinking, fighting, defecation, and not to mention not being able to get out of your car without somebody asking for money or your car. It's unsafe. To think that we could possibly ask for Dempsey to be made into a homeless shelter right next to the schools is just wrong. So we need to think outside the box and figure out a better place to put them. Right now, if you think it's hard to find teachers and support staff, try after we put them at work right next to a homeless shelter, which is in their office. What about the kids walking to and from the school, from their homes in the wooded areas next to the schools? What about the teachers and students' cars? They're not going to be safe. What's the police chief said? How about the school board? My understanding is that they were not even aware of this situation. Who's going to clean up the mess afterwards? Sullivan has not been cleaned up. It's boarded up, it has graffiti, and it's not used. We can't use it. So what's the plan? Have we talked to the businesses? What about the cars across the street in a brand new gas station? No one's going to want to go to the businesses that are right there with the secure, and they're going to have extra security. So I would ask that we look for another place for these. Don't use the rec centers or the ice rinks. There's plenty of places on the tiers that will not affect kids. We want to be safe and want our kids to go to school and not have to worry about homeless folks walking through the halls. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So that takes us to our 2 items of unfinished business, which I hope we can breeze through quickly, starting with any updates on Assembly approved appropriations. All right, so let's start with AR 2022-221S as amended, which was passed and approved on July 26th. We'll begin with United Way and the Landlord Partnership. Ms. Burke, are you here? I press it one more time. You turned it off. Now it's on. Thanks.
Good afternoon, I'm Nancy Burke with United Way, and we're sponsoring the Landlord Housing Partnership Program, and just wanted to give you a quick update on the project. We have several strategies we're pursuing. We're providing incentives to landlords at rent up. We're providing an incentive for longevity. We are working with a risk mitigation fund that can help address damages if they occur to a unit. We currently have over 80 landlords who are interested in the project or receiving some additional information and signing up with us. We have 66 landlords listed in our database program and 61 units that are turning on and off when availabilities come open. So the project is off and running. The next strategy to pursue was brought to us from surveys with landlords. There were a number of landlords who said they would have additional units available for rent if they could renovate them, and having access to some funding to do so would be instrumental to them. We believe there's about 60 that we know of that we've surveyed previously and that we can institute contact with quickly. So the renovation funding coming through the health department will help us address that. The health department's been a tremendous partner in this. They've been very helpful in helping us talk through our contract and get it initiated, and so we're working through the details on that now. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Ms. Burke. And my apologies, I forgot to note that Mr. Constant has been on the phone since a little after the beginning of the meeting. If there are any other assembly members who are on the phone, if you can just text me and let me know, I will announce that you are here. Any questions for Ms. Burke?
Sure.
Yeah, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So are we going to get a separate update on the funds that we set aside for renovation? Is that a separate project, or is that also connected to this?
Are you talking about the ARPA funds?
Is that this ordinance or the next one?
So
For unit renovation, the funds that we approved?
I
The
believe
alcohol tax funds, yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned 60 additional units. How quickly can you get those online?
That's a great question. We looked at our numbers this morning, and we think that we have about 25 landlords that we are actively in contact who have units. It would depend on how many units they have, but we're shooting for 12/31. And in fact, I failed to mention that the Landlord Housing Partnership now has someone who's going directly to Centennial to help see if we can get any folks directly out of the campground into housing. So we're treating this as part of the response to get people housed quickly. Sorry,
So
that's
you said 12/31 as in December 31st. So that's the target date to get those renovated additional.
That's the first group that we have, about 25.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ms. Burke.
Thank you.
All right, so now on to outreach, family emergency sheltering through Christian Health Associates, and single adult emergency sheltering through Brother Francis Shelter. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. Good morning. Meg Zalatel, Executive Director of the Coalition to Homelessness. I'm going to give you an update on outreach and Brother Francis, and then Ms. Ware will give you an update on families. So with regard to outreach, we are working with the health department to get our grant agreement in place. But until that grant agreement is signed, we cannot incur any expenses because they will not be reimbursed in order to be able to do the enhanced street outreach that you have all funded. So we're getting like the administrative pieces ready to go, but we cannot launch until we have a grant agreement signed. We are getting close to that point. Our hope is to be able to launch by the beginning of October. With regard to Brother Francis Shelter, my understanding is there was already the initial increase in census by 25, and the additional increase in census of 20 more individuals by October 1st is on target. Please note, though, that that will not clear the current wait list for space at Brother Francis Shelter.
Hello, Sharia Ware, Systems Improvement Administrator. For the family shelter update, we are actively Christian Health Associates is actively working with the health department in signing their grant agreement. Lots of emails back and forth. We are in the process of getting churches inspected as per the AFD policy and having their applications turned in. It is a little slow moving with individual moving parts and so many different applications, but I feel like we are moving towards our deadline. We all understand we need to be ready for October 1st and looking at other options, securing the non-congregate sites in case the churches haven't been inspected in time. But I do feel like everyone is moving swiftly and understands the timeline.
Thank you. I don't know if there are questions for you. I'm going to ask one initial question to the administration, which is regarding the grant agreement for outreach. Could you just speak to what's holding that up and if you'll be able to get that out soon?
Through the chair, are you talking about the ACH outreach?
Correct.
That is currently in discussion with the health department. It's still underway. We're actively pursuing it and trying to get it out the door as soon as possible.
So as I understood it, ACEH has a goal of trying to get the program on by October 1st. So will the health department be able to help achieve that goal?
Through the chair, I will work actively as much as I can to get that out the door. I have no quarrels with that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Ware, you mentioned that the Christian Health Associates was trying to work with the churches to get those additional beds, shelter beds, if that's how you describe them, but those spaces open by October 1st. How many are we talking about?
So we have engaged with 7 different churches. We do have 2 holes which are being filled with a non-congregate hotel site with an agreement to pay on the nightly if someone comes in on that night. Again, we're still planning. We're planning for 12 families, and then we also know there might be low utilization in the beginning, but we want to be ready in case that phone call comes in. And so the flow or the plan is already in place as far as who receives the calls, who gets the initial contact, and then layering on those case management services with the roll cap to ensure that they're moving along in the housing, what I'm calling a housing pipeline. It's not a real thing, but I'm going to make it there, and that's where we're at.
So the seven churches, 12 families. Are those 12 families included in the 350 number that we're talking about?
No, they are not.
Okay.
We're talking about new inflow, as our existing family shelters are still full.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions. Thanks so much. All right, so next item is, actually, Ms. Zalatel, I wouldn't go too far. Next item is AR 2022-222, which was passed and approved on July 26th and deals with the guest house. Folks, hopefully seeing the news that came out recently about this purchase. Ms. Zalatel, if you want to speak to it.
Yes, so I come with great news. The purchase has gone through. There's an operator in place for housing. So we have 130 new housing units online that didn't exist 2 weeks ago. That is something worth celebrating. And we have to thank our partners in that progress because it is such a big milestone for us. Just to put that in context, if those units weren't online, you would have over 100 additional unsheltered individuals to worry about this winter. So I want to thank First Presbyterian Church, LLC, the LLC they formed to hold that property and be a great partner and work with the Downtown Community Council. The Downtown Community Council for its partnership with the property and the operators. Operators are Match for property management and Henning. They're on site. And then, of course, none of this would have happened without generous support also from the Rasmussen Foundation and, of course, the municipality. So what we have learned is housing, in real time, things we knew are being proved out. Housing is incredibly stabilizing. So when that property was turned on in June by 99+1 as transitional housing, folks came from unsheltered status and the Sullivan straight into those units. As transitional housing, they were run very much like housing. They just didn't have to pay rent or lease up yet. Hardly any incidents have occurred there. They have been minor. The couple of calls to APD have been related to guests more than as to residents. They have been interacting with the Downtown Community Council. It is phenomenal. So I want, we're going to talk about some hard things today, but we have to take this moment to celebrate. This is amazing. Also, another partner in this project is Home for Good. They have some permanent supportive housing units there, and then the Landlord Housing Partnership is helping with some rental subsidies. If you ever wanted to see partnership at work, this is it. So it is a moment for celebration, and it is tremendous progress. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Alatel. All right, so last on the appropriations, let's touch on AR 2022-170S as amended, which was passed and approved on August 9th, with a mayoral veto given on August 16th and overridden on August 25th. Although the two representatives from the Rasmussen Foundation were not available today, the short update is as follows. Rasmussen is in negotiations for a letter of interest to purchase a property. That's pretty much it. Because these private parties are still in negotiations, that is all that I can share at this time. But hopefully we will have more information to share next month. Okay, so the next item under unfinished business is the Centennial Park Campground. Can the administration speak quickly to their efforts to demobilize the campground and what is going on there? Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair, the campground is going to be shut down like it is every year, later this year than usual. But that's the status of it.
Thank you. Any questions for the administration? Mr. Dunbar?
So, the administration has asserted that the campground is not part of the homelessness response, but that people cannot be moved from the campground because of Boise, Idaho. Martin v. Boise. So, if it closes on the 30th, are you going to be actively removing people? Or, and this is a question I'm getting from folks in Muldoon, if folks decide to stay at the campground, can people remain there? Because, again, under Martin v. Boise, if we don't have shelter capacity, there's nowhere for them to go.
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar. Obviously, you stated if we can't abate camps, so we'll close it as we're supposed to, but we have nowhere to put folks. The administration understands that this task force is coming forth with recommendations, and it's the position of the mayor that he will not support or support or oppose any location until a robust public process has happened, and we have an opportunity to hear from the public on all the proposed locations.
So what I'm hearing you say then is the campground might be officially closed, but it might still be occupied.
Well, again, as you know, Mr. Dunbar, through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, as you know, as you stated, Martin v. Boise, we cannot abate camps.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rowland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, we know that we can't abate the camp. I think, hopefully, be able to get some of those folks shelter housed. But there's also folks' belongings. I think there's pets in the campground. There's some inoperable vehicles that are there. Is there any plan for mitigating any of that?
Through the chair, Mr. Boland, I don't know the definition of abatement, but I have a hard time believing that taking people's pets, taking people's private property, which would probably include tents, cars, those kind of things, would not classify as abatement.
Okay. Can you unpack that a little bit for me? So you would be able to remove those items? Is that what you're saying?
I
would, or is there a plan for that?
Through the chair, I don't believe so, but
Through the chair, Mr. Bullen. So as of right now, the Campground Demobilization, I do believe that the municipality will come to a conclusion on where we can adequately place people for cold weather sheltering. As you know, winter is coming, and it is our duty to make sure that people are not outside freezing when temperatures drop below 45. With that being said, when we do determine the place of where we're putting people, it's our recommendation that they will be able to bring 2 totes with them to where they go, and then it's my understanding that the Parks and Rec Department will store people's belongings for up to 30 days. They will not be removed, they will not be destroyed. And as far as pets go, I am still actively working for options. We know that there's roughly about 30 pets in Centennial Campground, and that's a huge barrier to housing and sheltering in our municipality, and so that's a plan that I'm still actively trying to figure out.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I have 3 folks in the queue, and then hopefully we can move on to the big discussion. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So because the municipality never categorized it as homelessness response, we didn't provide any direct services in Centennial Campground. Instead, we relied on nonprofits to provide things like meals. When you close the campground on September 30th, are you going to allow those nonprofits to continue serving that community in the campground, or are you going to borrow the nonprofits from the campground?
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, I believe once the campground closes, the front gate will be closed as well. I believe if nonprofits want to provide outreach anywhere within the municipality, they're more than welcome to do so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Solt?
So I have a similar question, so I'll skip that. But are we going to get an update on the administration's response and where that lies at the moment as far as portable buildings and the microgrants?
Microgrants, yes. Portable buildings, no, because it can't be opened by October 1. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. This is to Mr. Trombley. Mr. Trombley, I was told about 6 months ago that the administration, the health department, was approached in regards to using the Henry's house. I was just informed with confirmation, and I have a tour tomorrow, that there are 80 beds available for the homeless. Is there a reason that the administration hasn't looked into it, or is there a reason that we wouldn't want to utilize those 80 beds?
through the chair, Ms. Allard, Ms. Johnson will be able to provide an answer to that.
Through the chair to Ms. Allard, I believe the Henry House is not a low barrier option. It's actually a high barrier, and so there are certain criteria that need to be met in order to be housed at that location. And so it doesn't count for cold weather sheltering options unless they meet that threshold. I believe one of them is a level of sobriety.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Voland?
Yeah, I just want to ask one more question. I would like, is Nate Zoltel still? No, okay. Ford's question about, remember Dunbar's question about, the Centennial Campground being closed, and will providers still be able to go in there and help and do outreach? I wondered if maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of the model of outreach with the sort of pavilion model that you're doing in Centennial Campground. And I know there's cities that have had a lot of success with that model, and potentially we could look at doing that elsewhere in Anchorage.
Yeah, absolutely. So the coalition in coordinating outreach has worked with outreach providers to do what we're calling pavilion pop-ups. We literally pop up in the pavilion at Penna Park, which is nearby. It is a safe location for staff. We have great lines of sight. We aren't in the campground. We have not been in the campground for some time due to safety concerns. So we've been there every Thursday. The nice thing about the pavilion is it's a covered space. We're able to bring out computers, we do coordinated entry assessments, we layer on all kinds of services. We bring coffee, cookies, food, dry goods as necessary. Tomorrow we'll also have South Central Foundation crisis counselors to help individuals deal with the transition that's coming up. So we do that. We will continue to do that. Once the campground closes, we will not be able to get vehicles like in and out of the campground. That's actually a big concern, and I think will actually become less safe than it is currently. But we will continue to go to the pavilion, basically next door. We also have our first secondary location pavilion pop-up scheduled for this Friday at Davis Park. So what we're doing is we're looking at the GIS map, discussing with outreach where there seem to be concentrations of individuals, so we can talk with them and we can create a welcoming contact with them where they can hopefully get dry, get something to eat, and engage more deeply. We're piecing this together right now. When we complete our grant agreement with the health department and we have some more resources for this, this will hopefully become a regular part of our outreach efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have to move us on. So that takes us to the big topic for today. As I said earlier, we're going to start with hearing from the Emergency Shelter Task Force. Then we will move on to the administration with any updates they may have. Then we will open up final audience participation for 20 minutes, and we will end with trying to achieve a sense of the committee and the administration members present. So who's going to be presenting on behalf of the task force?
Hello, Taria Ware again, the Systems Improvement Administrator for ACEH. And since your screen isn't working here, I'm going to use my phone to help.
Sure. But you want this, the back screen's open. Yeah. Okay, so if we can go ahead and get that one up on the back one.
Yeah. We did provide slides, and I believe Chair Rivera did say that they are online. I brought notes because there's a lot of wonderful things that the task force has done by meeting twice a week. So if we want to get into it. First slide?
Yeah, it's actually the slideshow, not the recommendations. There.
The green one.
There's a lot of documents on the committee website.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So I think that was the one that was labeled assembly presentation. Yeah,
there we go. Yes. Thank you so much. So I am here presenting on behalf of the task force, and the task force was made up, and it'll come later, but I just want to preface it with about 30 system matter experts and providers in the community that really collaborated together. So we're on the first slide, or next slide, thank you. The Emergency Shelter Task Force, and I'll read a little bit because I know some of you can't continue to turn around and look, is charged by the Anchorage Assembly with recommending options for emergency shelter for the winter of 2022-2023, approximately October to April, for adults, single adults experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Anchorage. The task force agreed to issue preliminary recommendations that could be implemented by September 30th of 2022. We acknowledge, again, that this is not, although there is no immediate available easy solution, the locations that are most suitable for emergency shelter and immediately available are MOA-owned facilities and all present some level of community impact and or public protest. These are recommendations only. Policy makers, the Assembly, and the administration will need to make the decision. We stand by to assist with what works to address unsheltered homelessness, but want to be clear as to our role and where our expertise lies, and it's a narrow lane of focus. And all of us have volunteered to do this work. It wasn't work that we were paid to do. It is work that truly those that were involved in the task force feel impassioned about and continue to want to do this work. Next slide. This is a really large slide of all of the task force members. The task force was truly an amazing opportunity. No one person made the recommendations we present today. It was done through consensus and as a collective group. The task force members are deeply knowledgeable about homelessness in the respective fields, and they were solution-oriented. They volunteered a significant amount of time and met for a month, twice a week, it felt like over a month, for a total of 4 hours a week. In between those meetings, there was a significant amount of work done through individual research and conversations and subcommittees. In addition to these individuals listed, many others joined us and provided input from time to time. We acknowledge our wonderful facilitator, Belinda Bro, and Agnew Beck for their assistance in creating weekly summaries of the group's work. And if you want to see all of the documentation and the recordings, that is on ACH's website and / I believe, task force. We did forget one wonderful member. Special shout out to Hugh Wade, who joined us in the task force after and was a very active member of the facilities subcommittee, which did a lot of the work as we look through tiers 1 and 2. Next slide. So the subcommittees are listed here as facilities. They did the site review. They reviewed numerous sites. I believe it was about 70 to 100 sites, some previously from the facilitated process, including many commonly suggested ones, and then we added others to the list in the group. Also, the operations and planning budgets, they prepared 7 different budget scenarios and stated assumptions and did a comparison, whereas we all know that housing costs less. Communications and community engagement. Our communications team or subcommittee attended 6 community councils. They held a press event and were actively engaging with the community, along with the decision to put up all recordings so everyone truly was informed in this process. There are no secrets. Everything, all our deliberation is there for everyone to kind of understand how we got to these suggestions. And then the data. We want to be data informed, which is why we talk about HMIS so much. And so we reviewed the data for relevant assumptions, and then we talked to those with lived experience because their voices matter. It is a choice for them. And so we talked to folks at several different sites, including Centennial Campground, trying to really see what their thoughts and feelings were in this process. Next slide. The task force had a charter. We wanted to be, again, solution and goal-oriented. So we had a charter of goals and desires. The recommendations were to reduce the risk of exposure to winter conditions to persons experiencing homelessness. Is it feasible to implement for this winter? And the planning process to support a long-term...
It appears that we have folks online. If you just make sure that you're muted, we're trying to work it on our end, but if you can help us too, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry. And planning process support a long-term strategy for emergency cold weather shelter and other emergency shelter solutions. Also leveraging people, moving people to being housed. Again, a stress on you do not have to stop in shelter, although shelter is a necessary component of our HPRS, which is our homeless prevention and response system. We want to make sure that we can house people directly from being unsheltered to housing. We have many folks who are unsheltered who currently are working and would love an opportunity to be housed. Then also will be seriously considered by the Anchorage Assembly and the mayor. We wanted the task force to know that their suggestions and recommendations matter and will have to be seriously considered. And then have public support, which is why we did the outreach and we're very intentional in those spaces. We concentrated on creating a plan that can be implemented, keeping operational consideration, and moving people out of homelessness in the front of the discussion. What we'll discuss a little later is that immediately available facilities outside of those owned by MOA are very hard, if not impossible, to find for immediate activation. So please remember, when we talk about a month, when we started meeting, it was a month. When we gave our recommendations, it's like less than 2 weeks of when this needed to be activated. And with the participation from AHD, understanding that to enter into a contract for something that is not owned by the MOA could take 30 or more days. And I think you did hear several other people come up with assembly appropriations that happened a few months back or a couple months back that still have not been entered into grant agreements. So just keeping that at the forefront. Next slide. The Emergency Task Force minimum criteria requires 24-hour access, meals, and we are saying 3 meals a day. Showers that are available require the use of HMIS data entry. And for those that aren't, if this is your first time in this area, then the HMIS system truly helps those to be connected to services. So that is why as I go further, when we're talking about other plans, ensuring that we are able to connect them to HMIS is very important, or else we will lose them and they won't have a navigable way out of that system for our use. And a room on site for a warming tent, and then of course the 150 limitation for Title 16. That can be changed by the assembly by approval, and that little excerpt is there. I won't read it, but those were the Emergency Shelter Task Force minimum criteria, which you will see why for Tier 1 and Tier 2 make things different. Next slide. The projected need is 350 unsheltered individuals. So not everyone that's unsheltered will be accessing the shelter. Some will wait till the weather gets colder. Some will, wait to see what the new shelter is like, who's there, where it's located, is it accessible. Also, the PFDs were deposited. If they have direct deposit, some will use their PFD for non-congregate housing or shelter at this time. And then paper checks will be available the first week of October. So we at the task force were guesstimating that about 70 to 75% or a lower initial occupancy in the first couple of weeks, so around 263, 270 persons would need to access the shelter. So a plan, a minimum of 90 days to account for kind of influx and outflow and really getting the operation underway. Next slide. This is a slide of data. So these are the demographics for all individuals in the homelessness prevention and response system from July 1st to the end of August. From these, we can extrapolate that those experiencing unsheltered homelessness proportionally fall within these demographics. Unfortunately, we were never able to get the client information from the Centennial Campground, and to date, ACH has not received a full grant agreement for street outreach, or enhanced street outreach efforts funded by the Assembly. Hopefully in the future there will be better data about who is unsheltered, but for our purposes of planning for this winter, we have to make some assumptions from what we know. And what we know is that we need a plan for separate spaces for men, and that we need spaces that can accommodate individuals with disabilities. We'll go to the next slide. So the Tier 2, the non-MLA sites, recommendations, no private locations are confirmed or ready for immediate lease for the MOA for non-congregate or congregate sheltering purposes. The facilities subcommittee investigated many, including, again, the Northway Mall, the former Alaska Club on Arctic, former Sam's Club, Johnson Tire in Midtown, JCPenney, and Sears Warehouse. There are potential options with likely later start dates. I know Chair Rivera talked about the task force talking about those later. So we're still investigating 5151 Fairbanks, a former B&B in Benson and Boulevard, although the owner would prefer to sell that property. The former Alaska Native Charter School, which is about $15,000 a month plus utilities, and has some compatibility issues that might be unresolved. So we are still working towards other options after the 90 days. Housing options are likely but not immediately available. So there was a letter of intent to purchase a hotel submitted by Rasmussen with a portion of the ARPA funding. Earliest activation would be November or December. And exploring another option for a year master lease at a hotel leveraging federal funds. And then the Alex Hotel has 50 rooms available for master lease, and details need to be worked out. So again, as we're looking at Tier 2, Tier 1 truly are the ones that can happen by October 1st. As we continue, next slide. So these are the Tier 1 MOA recommendations. Ben Boke, Dempsey Anderson Ice Arena, Sullivan Arena, Denina Civic and/or Convention Center, Egan Civic and/or Convention Center. The Golden Lion was really for a housing option, as assumptions regarding non-congregate and MOA-owned housing apply. Recreation centers that were withdrawn by consideration by the mayor, by the mayor on 9/13, and all met minimum emergency shelter task force criteria, which was the previous slides I read. Next slide. The existing program capacity for expansion with the Tier 1 recommendation. So Brother Francis Shelter, and Meg did speak to this earlier, has an additional 20 individuals by October 1st, but that will not clear an already long wait list. and they already did do the initial expansion of 24 individuals by September 1st. Covenant House of Alaska has capacity for 25 transition age youth, 18 to 24, and requires $200,000 in funding from October to December. Beans Cafe, capacity for 40 adults, and the requirement of $306,000 for funding, and a total capacity increase of 85 individuals, which again, we know there are 300, or assumptions are about 350 that are unsheltered. Next slide. These are our budget and operational assumptions. So the key assumptions were 150 persons per location. Again, after doing that deep dive, we know that that can be an increase with approval from the assembly, that they can access and services are provided 24/7, meals and showers. And so as you're seeing, the orange is the MLA congregate. It's $100 a day. Day services rate inclusive of food. And each one of these, I don't know if you want me to go through each one, Chair Rivera.
Give us as much information as you think we need.
Okay, great. So I would just go with I would just say this. Can we go to the next slide? I like this slide better. I'm a visual person. Thank you. So, if you've listened to any of the slides, the cost is the cost of shelter. So as you can see, the first orange bar in the bar graph, that is the MOA owned congregate shelter. That is the cost for the annual operation. And then the next in the blue is the least congregate shelter. Then we have the least non-congregate shelter. And I'm telling you this as we're going, it's going from most expensive to least expensive options, right? So the least hotel housing, and then of course we have our purchase hotel conversion housing, like the guest house, which is a marvelous thing, and then the MOA building housing in the green as the very last. So this is kind of where the task force landed on as far as budgets, and each of those scenarios are on the website if you want to see those in detail in our numbers person. Next slide. How do we achieve immediate needed capacity? So these numbers are fluid. For example, if one option isn't activated, then the capacity needs need to be picked up elsewhere because we still have a delta of 350 unsheltered. Any mini grant operations may also add capacity, but we also note that with the mini grants, we have to be able to, we have questions outlining HMIS uses and how we track those individuals that are accessing that service. And we plan for 75% of initial utilization as we recommend moving towards the full 350 capacity as soon as possible as temperatures continue to drop and the options become socialized amongst those who are unsheltered. Finally, we have accounted for new inflow, which will happen as close to 350 or over, is a reasonable planning assumption. The fluidity in the system within inflow and outflow underscores what we have, what we will need in data collected, and what we know as of this moment. Especially when we talk about mini grant locations and service delivery. So if we don't have a sense of the capacity, what the capacity is in the census on any given night, again, it becomes kind of impossible to move people along through this housing pipeline to see good referrals and shelter. And then the next slide. So these are other options that came up in the task force, and we just provided a budget. As we talked about before, the portables would cost about $934,000 per month if they were activated because of the staffing costs. So you're looking at 2 staff members in each of those 21 buildings. And these costs are incomplete because we don't know the costs associated with installation, utilities, restrooms. So there are a lot of other things that we just don't know. And then, of course, with the mini grants, questions about what is the application process, what is the capacity, how will those individuals be tracked, has come up. And then the Navigation Center, the assembly action, has been delayed to further consideration on October 25th. The next slide. So as we look forward to questions, our task force members are here, and so again saying we are happy that everyone is in the room and that they are here to help, and all the recordings can be found. I would like to also include that I appreciate how soon we are having this conversation, and it's still not soon enough. We always know, and I love that Alexa said winter is coming. It's my phrase. Winter is coming. And so as we work swiftly, it's cold outside now. It's raining now. The people are outside now. I am humbled to be able to have an auto start, but I am starting it every morning for my children, and it is only going to get colder. And some of our house folks do not have that ability. They are working, and when we look at options, we're also hopefully understanding the trauma that's involved in being homeless, and that the Sullivan was closed, and they were displaced. They were not put into shelter. And to move them back to a site that we all demobilize is also another form of trauma that you would be experiencing if we're putting back there, because they could have stayed there and not experienced bears and wet and cold and lacking of services. So, I mean, we all have choices, and I think what the task force has brought forward is choices for those people experiencing homelessness, choices for our community members to get behind, because I think we all want the same thing, and we want to ensure that those community members are not outside this winter. So thank you for hearing our report, and we will, I'll stay for questions.
Great, thank you. All right, so I have 2 members in the queue, starting with Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. So I heard you say that you guys did a great outreach. Why is the hockey community just now hearing that you recommended the Assembly take away their ice? This will impact 5,000 to 6,000 members, not including their families and volunteers. Not to mention, this also generates $700 per hour, and the ice is fully booked from 4 to 10 each night during the season. Could you explain your outreach better?
Wonderful, thank you. I want to also, I'll explain that, but also say again that we had a narrow focus. So our thing was to make recommendations of what can be turned on quickly. We did outreach to 6 community councils, not individual groups, and really looking towards the policymakers to make those decisions about community impact. And that's what I have to say about that.
And I'll go ahead
and follow-up, Chair?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to expand on that a little bit because sort of in my role as a member of the task force, I was part of the sub-communications group. So if you would like, Ms. Allard, I can show you the clear email communications. Frankly, that was sent later than we would like, but that's just the nature of the work. As was discussed in the timeline, the recommendations of the Dempsey and the Boki and everything else were made on the 14th. Prior to that, those weren't really on, not on the 14th. Yeah, it was on the 14th. Prior to that, those weren't really part of the communication subgroup outreach. So we began that outreach on, I believe it was the 16th, and it did include the hockey associations and the others that you mentioned.
So 7 days ago. Okay, thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and this is Meg Zalatal. I do want to say that as the Emergency Shelter Task Force brainstormed possible facilities, ice arenas were on there from the beginning as on the MOA facilities list and possible facilities. And the work has always been going on, as publicly noticed meetings and in a transparent form. So anyone could have joined and got engaged at any point. We have limited capacity as a volunteer group with our day jobs and everything else going on. So I would say that these recommendations from this group should not feel like a surprise because they were on the list from the very first time we started evaluating sites.
Thank you. Ms. Allard, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, and I appreciate Ms. Zalatal's comments, but 7 days is just not enough time. And I'd also like to state that every single one of those hockey community members that I know of, and I would guarantee probably all of them work and have day jobs too. But if we're going to try to take the ice that actually does belong to the hockey community, that's what it's there for, then I would then say that we should do better in communicating and doing better with outreach to the communities that it directly impacts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Voland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the task force. I know that what you put together here does reflect hours and hours of volunteer efforts. And these were open meetings that anyone from the public could have participated in. For those that are curious and want to watch these meetings back, they're available on aceh.org. The work that is reflected here in this report is the work of folks who chose to step up and try to be part of the solution. And so I want to thank all of the community partners who are part of that convening. In addition to municipal-owned properties, I know that the task force property subcommittee worked with the realtors extensively to contact property owners, see whether they would lease for the purpose of homelessness shelter. It's probably not surprising that many private property owners were not willing to do that. And what this has revealed to me is that the options are so limited in our city. And I guess, that very specific remit that the task force had, essentially you're providing to us, here's the criteria that we looked at, that we selected. Here are the options, the recommendations, and the cost considerations. I think I hear you saying that it's now up to policymakers, the administration, the assembly, to consider not just the dollars involved, but those other costs, social costs, community costs, impacts to our quality of life. Additionally, I want to thank the hockey community. Thank you for being here. I grew up in a hockey family. I played stick and puck. My sister was a figure skater. My brother was on a sponsored traveling team. And I know the positive impacts that the hockey community brings, and that sports as a whole brings to our youth. It's been very instructive to me to hear from leaders in the hockey community like Daryl Thompson, Judy Carey, about all the programming that is currently ongoing and upcoming at the Dempsey. And I think that's something that a lot of the members maybe weren't aware of. And so I guess one question that I have for the task force would be about how many properties we're looking at. And it could be in the tens, you can round it for me.
Thanks. So we have other task force members here who headed up those things. So we have John Luddleton and Hugh, who are both part of the facilities review. I would actually prefer that they speak with you about the process. Thanks.
Great. Is that okay? Can we hear from Mr. Luddleton? Hi, John. Thank you for being here. My question was about how many properties the facilities or the property subcommittee looked at.
About 100 on the list. Closer at some that are obvious. And then I think about 17 of those were municipal facilities.
Okay. Thank you. Could you maybe speak just a little bit to the process of the subcommittee in trying to identify those facilities?
Yeah, we started with the list that the facilitated group had a year ago. So some of those, just have everything on there. And, a lot of those are those. The mission last year was more long-term than this just very short-term, what we're going to do right now. But we started with that. And then UA, who spoke, was very active with Ryan and Schwabi, looking at MLS and the personal knowledge as commercial brokers on different locations that were available. And then just personal knowledge of people on the committee, which was Shelley Round, Lisa Sauter, David Rittenberg, myself, Hugh, Ryan, and Chris Schutte, who was also very involved 2 years ago when the Berkowitz administration was working on it. We just scoured places, and then we went by the criteria that you saw Trey put out, and just kind of rank them. And most of them, they're already occupied, and the owners aren't interested. It was very simple. There was no one called and said, yes, I've been waiting for your answer, and said, yes, I've been waiting for your call, I'm happy to help. But there are some of the works that I think could be available, but those are things that, to lease or to buy or whatever, it would take months, if you're fast at it. I mean, 3 months is fast, negotiate a lease and all the parameters and so on, especially through the city's processes. So it really did narrow it down. And we were just focused on, does the facility have what's needed to do the job? And, and that's, as Trey said, and you mentioned, really the tough policy decisions, the bravery is on you guys, to make the call.
Mr. Chair, we're going to have thank you, John, I really appreciate the answer. Is this an opportune moment to maybe ask a question of somebody representing the hockey community, or should we hold off on that?
I'm looking at the time. We have limited time, and I really do want us to get to the heart of the conversation. We are going to be, so once we're done with the queue, we're going to be opening up to final audience participation. So folks who signed up are going to be able to speak. And then we are, and then we need to get to the sense of the body. So I am going to ask that, hopefully they are on the audience participation, but otherwise I need to get us.
Do you have Daryl Thompson on there? Because I'd like to hear from him.
Yes, he is on there.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. All right, so for these next three folks, if we can try to keep it short. So Mr. Solt.
Thank you. Through the chair. So some of the things first, thank you to the task force. I know it's not a great job and appreciate the work you did. You did evaluate a lot of facilities. There's always the question, what if we do nothing, right? That option is always out there. So we have a timeline. We certainly want to do something, but what if we miss that timeline? What if we miss 40 degrees? How do we make the most of that situation, right? Of the 350 number that we're discussing, is that the total population, or is there a percentage of that population that will remain out in the woods at campgrounds year-round, regardless if opportunity is available for them? But I certainly know I see campsites year-round out in the woods. And then go on the record. I'm sorry if people will be traumatized for going back to the Sullivan, but it's truly an emergency situation, and we have to pull that. I'd rather pull the golden line. I'd rather fund other opportunities we have from other nonprofits, from other shelters, look at hotels. But if we have to go back there, that's better than being out in the cold, right?
We are under the wire. So I'm actually going to pause you right here. So I'm going to ask if anyone else has comments about we should do a specific facility, leave those for later, right? We're not going to do that right now. We are just doing questions on the presentation before us, and we are going to get to the sense of the body discussion. I need you all to work with me so that we can get this done. Mr. Solt.
All right, thank you, Chair. So I guess I'd like to know the answer to the 350 number. Is that the total population, or is there a percentage of that population that will remain in the woods by choice?
Thank you, Selena.
Can you turn the mic on? Thanks.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Schultz. So the 350 number is the assumption. We know that there are about 200 at Centennial, and then from our outreach efforts currently, we're assuming another 150 throughout the municipality. And then you go ahead with your second question, if I think I remember it, but go ahead.
Yeah, it was just of that number, is there a percentage that just won't come? They prefer to stay isolated by themselves. So is it really a 350 number?
Yeah. So we're still assuming 350 because what we're seeing is when there are blizzards or long periods of really cold weather, people do come indoors and seek shelter. So we want to have that availability for them. So if they only want to stay 1 or 2 nights in the winter process, they still have a bed and meals and services that they can access.
Thank you. So I have 3 folks in the queue, starting with Mr. Constant. Mr. Constant?
Can you hear me?
There we go. We can hear you now.
I just wanted to comment. There was a suggestion made that there wasn't proper outreach done in all of this. I just want to offer a counterpoint, and that's just simply this. Our emails have demonstrated, and that room being filled has demonstrated that the outreach has in fact occurred. Members of the community are aware, and our process is proceeding with the full attention of those who are impacted. And so I think that it's fair to believe that it wasn't done in the best way, but it's also fair to conclude that it's actually been very effective. And thank you to everybody for showing up.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just wanted to mention that most of the emails that I'm getting, or a lot of them, are suggesting that we use the Northway Mall. And that facility was evaluated on a couple of 3 occasions, I believe. And they came up with the same advice all the time, that it would be too expensive. And so I was just wondering if you have any information about that facility, how much it might cost, so that people will understand the reason we haven't chosen that facility.
Yes, if you have specific questions, I'll ask for Mr. Wellington to come back, but I remember from the facilitated group that they were not interested in that option at this time.
And as Mr. Wellington comes up, if he wants to add anything, we're really not going to be talking about North Way today because it can't be opened up by October 1. So I'm really trying to keep us focused if you can't tell. Okay, so I'm going to keep going through the queue. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to say thank you to the task force and also to the members of the community for your hundreds of emails. I'm still working through responding as quickly as I can. Sorry to those of you I haven't responded back to yet. And I'll hold on the comments out of respect for the chair that I was originally going to say. But a question, you mentioned, Ms. Ware, the number in code that limits shelters to 150 persons. And did that number, I mean, how did that factor into your list of recommendations? Or maybe it did, and I'm not suggesting that it should be increased or changed. I was just curious since it was included in your presentation. Thank you.
Right. I'll answer the best I can, and if Meg would like to come up, then she can. But what I will say is that our assumptions based on costs were for 150 persons each. But when we made the recommendation for like another site such as Benboki or any other MOA-owned facility, going up to the 70 to 75% is where we'd like to kind of land, and knowing that the assembly body can make that decision to increase that provision. If you can continue.
Yeah, thank you. So we did start with the 150 assumption. When we were talking originally about the rec centers, those were on our list. We didn't see any way that they could accommodate more than 100 to 150, and that was what was in the invitation to bid. As we looked at the prior utilization of the hockey rinks in particular, we saw that those numbers were over 150. So we went back and reviewed the code and saw that by approval, you guys could increase that number. But the performers are based on a 150 assumption. Turning on 2 facilities is certainly more costly than turning on 1 facility. And that was one of the things that we also analyzed. So if you look at a 150 facility, it will cost what it costs regardless of its utilization. But if you turn on a facility, and in the documents supporting the task force, there's a congregate 260 facility pro forma. It shows that the cost is very incremental to turn on the higher census facility because your infrastructure costs are less. So, for example, the maintenance and operations for MOA facilities is about $30,000 per month. So if you turn on 2 MOA facilities, now you're at $60,000 per month.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
So through the chair, real quick, did we look at any facilities outside the municipality that would be willing to house homeless?
So we definitely did not look outside of the MOA, mostly because of service providers and service delivery. How do they access those services? How do we get there as providers get there? And one of the things that came up in the task force when they did talk to folks with lived experience was access to transportation, access to mental health, or even all providers, close vicinity to grocery stores or places where they can get food and have their daily needs met.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much. All right, so that takes us through the queue. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and open it up now for final audience.
Chair, I'm sorry.
I just got your text. Go ahead, Ms. Allard.
Thank you. I just have a question. Is there a reason the Russian Jack Chalet isn't on the list by any chance? Did we look at that?
Who would like to speak to the chalet?
The Russian Jack Chalet is on that list, the broader list, but it didn't make tier 1, and it doesn't have the capacity, not even close. The design is more nooks and crannies than open sidelines.
Chair, can I do just a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Mr. Weddleton, can you tell me what capacity it did have, just so I have a little bit more understanding, please?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So if the chalet
Could you explain a little bit more on the Russian Jack, the capacity it did have, or lacked? Could you give me a number?
Oh, it can't. I think it just got, having been there and seen and familiar with it, personal knowledge, and compared to any of the other places. I mean, even we've got like the, bunker and the Kincaid Chalet and the Wax Bunker and so on. So, just that one, the Russian Jack drops very quickly compared to any other municipal building.
did we actually do any research on obtaining it? Or did we actually go into the facility and do a recon?
Thank you, Ms. Aller. This is Ms. Zalatel. So looking on the website, the capacity for any event at the Russian Jack Chalet is 75. And so if you were going to utilize it for habitation and following the current 6-foot spacing for our cots, we figured that it would reduce that number significantly. So we didn't feel it was a terribly viable option, particularly when we were looking at what it would cost to stand up each MOA facility.
Okay, but it is going to cost a substantial amount of money if we use any ice arenas because we lose revenue.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so now we're going to go ahead and open it up for final audience participation. So I have the list, so I'll just call folks up. I'll probably call 2-3 at a time so you can line up. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please introduce yourself at the beginning of your remarks. I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 20 minutes. When this timer ends, we'll be done with final audience participation. So we'll try to get through as many of these individuals who signed up as possible. So the first 3 folks are Jeannie Carey, Wendy Moe, Brian Gastruck. Welcome.
Are you starting the timer or should I
If you can turn the mic on.
Okay.
And when you speak, I'll start the timer.
Okay, we're speaking now. Thank you to Senator Rivera and the rest of the Assembly. I really appreciate being here, and I hope I can cover a lot in 3 minutes. I'm the president of the Anchorage Hockey Association, as well as on the PTA for Government Hill, West High, Romig. I advocate for the children and the youth and having healthy activities. So I would tell you when the task force released last week that they were considering Dempsey, I guess I was in shock for a while, saying how could they come up with this solution? Surely it's reasonable. And I want to kind of go through the process, and I did go to the task force meeting on Monday and voice my concern there that they were being set up, right? Because it's such an obviously bad choice for a lot of different reasons. How can we have this disconnect? And as I learn more information, I kind of see the forces that are happening, and I have to make a call to the community to not be pointing fingers or trying to use members of our community as pawns for any political activity. We're talking about real people in real lives. I hear from a lot of different voices, and I'm going to run out of time, and this is really important. But there were 30 volunteers on the task force, and they're not political bodies. They were there to solve a problem, and they had a particular perspective. And in their Wednesday meeting, when they set the Tier 1 list, they even admitted that they were a part of a frictionless bubble. And they did that Tier 1 list, and Aller did point out that it probably had a bias to who is on that Tier 1 list, and not all parties were at the table. Once they reached out on Friday for impact to the community, you heard the email went out on Friday, and we realized Dempsey really was on that list. We could have and congregate low barrier shelter right next to Romig and West. There's some code going on. We have members of our community that don't know what congregate necessarily means or what low barrier means. And why are we not using the Golden Lion and the history there? And there's good reasons why we won't use the Golden Lion. And I would love to go at length about what is going on. And a lot of fingers can be pointed. But there are solutions under our nose, both short-term and long-term. So to keep it brief, I would like to have this group remove Dempsey Anderson and Ben Boki on their Tier 1 list, just like the Fairview Rec Center was removed, just like the Spenard Rec Center was removed, and just like the Kincaid Chalet is not on there, and just like the Russian Jack is not on there, due to community impact. Those aren't community facilities that should be used. Can I answer questions? You want to take the next person?
I don't have anyone in the queue for questions.
Okay,
Thanks. And just so you know, 20 minutes is all inclusive of questions, so just be very careful when you do ask your questions. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Wendy Moe, and I'm a lifetime Alaskan, born and raised here. I have 4 children, also born and being raised in Alaska. I am in my family, they kind of joke when the B word comes out, volunteer, time on down. I'm a professional volunteer as well as a business owner myself. My husband owns a business. I am the president of the PTA at Romig Middle School. I'm also, I hate these things, my heart's racing. I'm also the West High PTA treasurer. I kind of helped Baxter recently. Anyway, back to the points. I don't think that the Dempsey is a good location for a shelter. Dark nights, kids walking to and from school. Right now we use it as a drop-off pickup point for the kids. The kids walk through there. Some of these points were already made. They walk through there on a regular basis for cars. After school activities, the traffic involved with foot traffic going across Northern Lights there, it's hard just being in a vehicle trying to navigate that particular area. There's also an overpass for walking across Northern Lights. The kids will use that. The homeless are going to use that too, I believe, but not in a positive way. They're going to be, camped out up there. So then it won't even be a safe route for children to go to school. Aquarian Elementary is not far away either. My daughter, 16 years old, was in Carr's parking lot the other day. She was approached by an individual who said, I'm a really nice person, I don't do drugs or anything. Do you have any money that you can help me out with for food? And my daughter said, I'm really sorry, I don't. To which this individual just turned really mean and nasty and negative towards my daughter and scared her. That was just in the parking lot without, a shelter right across the street. So, also I know that, with regards to our school resource officers, the budget for the school district got cut because of the municipal government decided that they weren't going to pay for, the prorations of the school resource officers. So the school district had to pick up 75% of the budget for that, which is $2.3 million. The school is facing a $54 million deficit next year. That's going to cut our teachers. That's going to cut resources for the children. If we have a homeless shelter right next door, who's going to be responsible for, grounds maintenance and making sure there aren't needles or, glass bottles or feces, things like that. Another, guns, violence, that's happened. The other individual said that, the camp over there is very unsafe. So now we're going to take a community of very unsafe into the school district. Thank you.
Thank you. So, hold on, ma'am. I do have someone in the queue for you. I think a little bit of a kind of...
Sorry. I did pass out, or had passed out 2 aerial
Yes.
photos of the site so you could see where Romig and West and the
Thank you.
Dempsey.
Yeah, so I do have someone in the queue for you. It's a little bit of a can of worms, but let's just get through it. Mr. Dunbar?
So a quick comment and a question. The original mayor's proposal was to cut that SRO funding. The assembly restored that over his veto. So that money did actually end up in the municipal budget, which is a good thing. And then I wanted to ask you, you have some concluding statement. It sounded like you were about to say something and then you ran out of time.
Well, it was just basically, that we've already got, and my mind's just blank, but on the east side of town where everybody is right now in Centennial Park, there's been gun violence in the park, there's been, personal safety issues, and then also there was a recent individual that was shooting at cars on Glen Allen, or Glen, right there, yeah. So, it seems like, this is just a recipe for disaster for these students to not be able to feel safe to go to school and learn. And we all know the pandemic has had a crazy effect on our lives, but we're starting to try to get back to normal. So
Thank you.
I know you want me to get down. And I just have one more thing to say. I'm sorry. This isn't political. We all got to work together as a community.
I actually do have someone in the queue for you, ma'am. I'm going to ask you to keep your response really brief because I want to keep hearing from people. Mr. Constant, please keep it brief.
Yeah, thank
you. Actually, it's not a question. I just want to put it to the record that there's still no association with the shooting that happened on the highway, homelessness, and people that were in the camp. And I'm hoping people will be very careful not to generalize in such a way as to create a perception of something that's not in fact.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Allard, you're in the queue.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. I just wanted to make a comment and follow up with a question as well, that the funding for the SROs was reallocated. It wasn't cut by the mayor. I just want to put that on the record. Did you have any other concerns about how recommendations maybe where you would find a place we could house the homeless? If not, it's okay. We have options.
Yeah, I mean,
just wondering.
I really wanted to come to this with, a suggestion, and, I did a little research, and all I can say is I'm not, versed and educated in this, and all I could do is Google, and I know Houston, Texas has had a great success story in reducing 40% of their homeless, and from what I read, and my comment for that is everybody had to just come to the table, put the differences aside, and work together. Because everybody here in this room understands that we have an issue that we need to resolve. And everybody's goal, I think, is to try to come to a solution that resolves as much as we can the problem that we're being faced. But we all just have to work together. And it's going to cost money. And the community just has to understand that, that's it. But if we could reach out, and I mean, there's volunteers here that have done that, but if we could reach out to like the Native community, the Native corporations, just to get the funding, it's there and it can happen. We just have to work together and be kind to each other.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. All right, welcome. And then after Mr. Gastruck, there will be John Steele, Daryl Thompson, and Keith Morris.
Hi, my name is Brian Gastruck, born and raised here in Anchorage. Went through the hockey community. I know that I do want to say also thanks to the task force. You guys are all new volunteers. We really appreciate it. I want to start the time. I want to make sure everyone else has time. I have questions. The question, it's going to sound somewhat cold-hearted, but I never heard the answer to Mr. Salt's question about what happens if. What happens if on October 2nd we don't have something? Follow-up question to that. Did the task force look at the lost revenue in that? I've tried to read the reports because we've had all of 6 days to do it while I'm still trying to work, watch the videos, listen to the comments. Did the task force look at the cost of the lost revenue of not obtaining that $750 an hour, 7 days a week? With that, the Dempsey, Bokie, those recreational facilities, including the rec centers, they should be dropped immediately. They should not be considered at all. You are going to be affecting thousands upon thousands of kids, youth players. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next I have John Steele. Is Mr. Steele here?
Hi, I'm Melody Isgro. I'm a parent and concerned citizen. First of all, I want to say that I fully support the Assembly and the Council trying to find appropriate housing for our homeless population. This is a very vulnerable population that does need our support and our help, so I do fully support that. However, I am highly concerned about the potential selection of specifically the Dempsey-Anderson site as a homeless shelter in light of its proximity to the Rome Lake Middle School and West High School. And I think this will most certainly lead to some increased use and access of illicit substances and alcohol in that general area, with some downstream effects of increased teen substance use as a consequence. I am a board-certified addiction medicine specialist. As such, I am very familiar with the degree of substance use amongst the homeless population, and especially our homeless population. Nationally, about 38% of homeless individuals use substances, are dependent on alcohol, and about 26% use illicit substances. Within this population, there are not only individuals who are using substances, but also some who may or will sell drugs and alcohol to others, and they may not hesitate to do this with minors to sell to minors, to use with minors, or possibly even take advantage of minors. It is well known in the literature that one of the foremost contributors to teen substance use is access to illicit substances. With increased access comes increased use, and all the detriments that are associated with teen use, including poor grades, social isolation, higher truancy, higher dropout rates, higher illegal activity, drugs for sex, and teen pregnancy. Now, I'm not trying to say that the entire school population is going to go out and suddenly start drinking and using substances. I'm not trying to say that at all. But what I am saying is that with increased access, there is likely going to be some increased ability to get drugs for experimentation, and those students who are currently using substances will probably have an increase in their use, which can be very detrimental. Nationwide, about 1 out of 5 high school students are currently being offered, given, or sold substances in our high schools. So again, with increased access to the area, I'm only concerned that this number might go up. In conclusion, and then I would also say that about 100%, pretty much 100% of individuals that I treat for substance use disorders have their beginnings in teen substance use in the 12 to 14 year age range. So this is not something that just happens in adults. For many people, it happens in childhood. Addiction is now considered a pediatric disease. In conclusion, if you go forward with this plan to relocate the homeless shelter to the Dempsey Anderson ice rink near these schools, again, I am concerned that there will likely be some increase in teen substance use. Even if that's a minority of the students, those students are significant. They go on to be adults and go on to have issues and then end up going back into the homeless population. So we want to present this early. So please.
Thank you. All right, next we have Mr. Daryl Thompson, excuse me.
Hi, thank you. Am I on, Mike? Hi, I'm Daryl Thompson. I'm a lifelong Alaskan. Grew up here, played hockey here. I'm a volunteer. I've been a volunteer on the Alaska State Hockey Association's Board of Directors for 20 years. I've been the board president for the last 12 years. I also spend volunteer time with the U.S. District, U.S. Hockey Board of Directors from Pacific District, USA Hockey Legal Council, a bunch of other volunteer stuff, so I didn't have time to show up to the task force. But I do want to thank the task force and Assembly for the hard work that you're doing. It's God's work. It's not easy work. I just want to say I'm also a lawyer, and for the last 35 years I've dealt with so many custody cases. It's sad, but you get into this fight about legal custody. And in order to share legal custody, make those important legal decisions for our children's lives, people have to be able to communicate and cooperate. And I just think, just generally speaking, I hope that the administration and the Assembly can get to that place where you, as the legal custodians of this community, can learn to cooperate and communicate a little better. I'm not going to point fingers, but just in general terms. I want to give a little data, because I know the task force might not have had the data, but we have about 9,000 members of the Alaska State Hockey Association. And that doesn't include the family members, the mom and dads who drive to the rink and hang out at the rinks, and the grandmas and the grandpas. And shuttering any more rinks would be devastating to the Alaska State Hockey Association and all of its members. The rinks are booked solid from now until March. And that's $1.3 million of revenue lost by not utilizing the Dempsey Anderson rink. I know it says 90 days, but that's unrealistic. It won't be back at all this season. And we have people, tournaments, we have tournaments scheduled for both the Dempsey and the Bokie. And the way the ice allocation works is if you take away the Dempsey, some of those that have a higher priority are going to move over to the Bokie and take away the opportunities for some people that may be in the Bokie. And I talk particularly about the Wolverines. This town lost the Aces, barely got our Seawolves back, and the Wolverines is a great junior program. But they're there at the Bokie, and you're going to survive without the Sullivan. We're here to say, don't use the Dempsey or the Bokie, use the Sullivan, because they're going to be able to survive with you. Cooperation between the school district and the management program and the Wolverines to find a path at the Bokie. But if you take the Dempsey out, those with higher priority are going to be over at the Bokie, and then the Wolverines are going to get booted. And it's just a ripple down effect. And I think of the ripple effect for all the families that have already booked to come to Anchorage, and a little mini infusion for our hotels, for our rentals, for rental cars, for restaurants, for coffee shops, of the thousands of families that come into this community and participate in hockey. That's gone. Played Against Sports, Champions Choice, all the different other supporting services that get adversely affected when thousands of people can't participate in the game of hockey. Trophy shops, gear shops. I mean, the ripple down effect on the economy is huge.
Thank you. I don't see anyone. Okay, actually, Mr. Vola.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I heard two things. Number one, and I think this is helpful information for the assembly. The Wolverines are at the Boki.
Yeah, they haven't inked the deal because the management team is waiting to find out what happens here. They've got an obligation to use the ice according to the ice allocation policy that was first established incidental to a lawsuit that the Firebirds had back in 1998 with the city under Title IX to make sure the girls had hockey. A settlement was reached with the major user groups, okay, in order to how we're going to allocate. There's a prioritizing of that. Included among them is the school district and other various local associations. And the Wolverines don't currently have an ice allocation directly. And so if the Dempsey goes out, Boki has to be filled with those few sheets that they're using by those that have the priority on that allocation list. They're going to move from the Dempsey, and then they're going to be out. But they're willing to move forward. If Dempsey stays, they're going to go, and Keith Morris is here to say that, they're going to go forward at the Boki so you can utilize the Sullivan Arena. It's already not being used as an ice rink, and it makes no sense from a recreational community to take two more sheets out of the inventory of the municipality when one is already out.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to reiterate that point, Mr. Thompson. So you're putting into the record now formally that you know, and I believe I know this too, that the Wolverines are not planning to go to the Sullivan Arena in October, as has been rumored.
Your mic's off.
I don't think they could as a practical matter, number one. Number two, Keith Morris is here to speak to that as well, but I did talk to Cara Bustamante, who's part of the ownership group Monday before we met with the mayor, and she confirmed it. So did the management group who manages our ice facilities, the O'Malley's group, and they're ready to sign that contract to have them housed at the Ben Boki.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's exactly what I heard, is that there is no user intended at the Sullivan at this time. And one last thing, I just want to say thank you to the task force, through the coalition, for all of this wild work.
Thank you. All right, so folks may have heard. Thank you. So folks may have heard that the timer on my phone went off. So we are out of time for final audience participation. Wait, this is a working meeting. This is not a public hearing. I'm sorry that we couldn't accommodate more individuals. There will be the Monday special meeting. And I invite individuals to come to the Monday special meeting. But we got to get to the work, which I think is what you all want us to get to.
He's trying to get the work done.
Will we be able to speak on Monday?
All right, folks. There is, at the special meeting, there will be audience participation on the agenda, yes.
Before voting?
That will be a decision of the body. Usually at special meetings, it is at the end of the meeting. But I need us to move on. So,
what good does that do?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I need us to move on. Okay, so now to the hard part of today's meeting, getting a sense of the body. So, Mr. Turner, can you please put up the Excel?
Mr. Chair, while we wait, I just wanted to say this is pretty well behaved for a hockey crowd.
Okay. Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to be working off of this in hopes of getting to a plan that meets the need to provide shelter for 350 individuals by October 1. We're going to start with the low-hanging fruit, which I have put in here as Beans Cafe, Covenant House, Brother Francis Shelter, and many grants. Understanding that Even the low-hanging fruit is going to have community impacts. And then I will be, for each of these items, I'll be asking the task force or the coalition, whichever is appropriate, to weigh in on operational viability and give us any information they'd like to share to help us make our decision. Then I'll move on to the assembly and the administration for us to have back and forth, and if we want to have back and forth with the task force as well, we can do that. And then finally, so let's go ahead and begin with Beans Cafe.
Point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just looking at the time, 12:50, is your intent to ask for a motion to extend?
Yeah. I don't know how that happens. We ran out of time. Okay, so yes, we should extend. I think I had planned, maybe this was naive, but 20 minutes for this discussion. Let's go ahead and just extend to 1:20 so we can get it done.
So moved.
Okay. Any opposition to extending to 1:20? All right. So we'll go ahead and start with the task force or coalition. If you could go ahead and weigh in on the Beans Cafe. Thank you.
Thank you. So we were fortunate to have two community providers step forward. Beans Cafe, with a facility that's already under their control, has a longer-term plan that's slightly different, but they wanted to help out in this opportunity. They submitted a proposal. It was an attachment to the Emergency Shelter Task Force. Ms. Sauter is here if you have any specific questions about it. But we represented both the capacity and the cost through December, because my understanding was that we were looking at things through the end of 2022.
Thank you. And can you just remind me, and it'd be great if you could maybe just stay up here somewhere, could you remind me what the suggested capacity at Beans Cafe was?
40.
40, all right. Let's not fill it in just yet, because I think we'll have a formal, do we agree? Well, we're obviously not voting today, because the voting will happen on Monday, but I want to get a sense of the body before we put any numbers on there. Okay, so now we're going to move on, thank you. We're going to move on to Assembly and Administration. I'll start with Administration. Are there any thoughts on just the Beans Cafe portion?
Through the chair, yeah, we're here to listen and take community input from the task force as well.
Okay, so then Assembly members, any thoughts on the Beans Cafe? 40 individuals, I believe it was semi-congregate was the idea. Mr. Dunbar?
I apologize if I missed this, but where? Beans Cafe doesn't own that building anymore, correct? So which building are you talking about when you describe those 40?
Either Ms. Alto or Ms. Sauter, whoever would like to speak to it.
Through the chair, it is a facility that we are under a purchase sale agreement and currently have a lease on. It is located on Hyde Street and had been traditionally used as a hostel and boarding house.
Hyde Street, so it's in eastern downtown?
Yeah, more midtown. I'd say it's about 32nd seat.
Okay.
It's less than a block or two from bus routes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to note that assuming that there is there are no potential community impacts to increasing the capacity for any of these, Beans, Covenant House, or the Francis Shelter, I'm a yes on all that, on all of them, just for expediency.
Thanks. We'll still go through one by one, but glad to know where you're standing at. Any other thoughts before? Okay, so is the sense of the body that we can go ahead and put a 40 in there? All right, let's go ahead and put 40 in there. So now that leaves us at 310. Next one is Covenant House. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
I don't know if we want to say this at the end, but maybe before we go in there. My understanding from the presentation from the task force is that 350 is actually not the number we need on October 1st. It's closer to 270. You said it was 75% utilization. 270 is the number we're shooting for, and then hopefully we have a couple more months while people are renting rooms with PFDs and that kind of thing to stand-up housing.
Yeah, thanks. I should have done that first. So I guess, what is your advice as task force? Keep it at 350 or change?
So what we said was we think the initial utilization in the first weeks will be about 75%. We think there's an effect for the PFD, but as we move into the colder parts, which is a very cold month in November, or week in November, and we move into the hard winter, so we are asking you to plan for 90 days. So we would ask that you plan at 350 for 90 days. However, if you have to runway some options on later in October or something like that, that would probably be workable. But by the time we hit November 1, you're going to probably see closer to full utilization. And of course, as we see options become available, we'll get that feedback really quick as to the likelihood of utilization.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so unless there's any other discussion, I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 350. All right, so Covenant House, go ahead.
Thank you. So Covenant House, like Beans Cafe, has generously offered to open up some additional capacity utilizing its gym. You have the proposal in the attachment to the Emergency Shelter Task Force. It is 25 individuals at a cost of $200,000. This is specifically targeted to transition age youth, 18 to 24, but if those folks are included in the demographics and this 350 we are talking about, we still consider them single adults. And Ms. Keir, who is the Executive Director of Covenant House, is here if you have specific questions about our program.
Thanks. So I have two folks in the queue, starting with Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it was in regards to the last facility we just spoke about. I heard that we're going to go ahead. Can you name the facility again, please?
Yeah, so the last facility that the Beans Cafe, which I got the sense of the body was thumbs up, was their new facility on Ide Street in Midtown.
And that was for 350 persons?
No, that was for a capacity of 40 individuals.
Okay. I just have a question. Are we looking at, when we're doing this plan, are we looking at spreading the homeless throughout all these shelters? Are we looking at just one key facility?
So, Ms. Allard, I'm not sure if you are able, if you're looking at the spreadsheet that I am looking at, but if you go to the committee website, or actually, it'd be great if we could just email it to the committee members, to the body. Okay, so all members on the phone will have the spreadsheet that we're looking at, and I will just detail it before I continue. So there are two parts to the spreadsheet. First is what I call the low-hanging fruit, the sort of the easy choices. None of these are really easy because all of them are going to have some type of community impacts, but that's what I'm calling it. And those include Beans Cafe, Covenant House, Brother Francis Shelter, and the mini grants. Then the other discussion that we have after the easy one is the harder discussion, and that is MOA-owned facilities. Those include Golden Lion, and we are going to have the discussion in the order presented. Golden Lion, Sullivan Arena, Egan Convention Center, Dynamic Convention Center, Dempsey Ice Arena, and Boki Ice Arena.
Okay, and Chair, I guess part of my concern is then when we're adding the community-owned buildings, which Title 29, the mayor gets to decide. On those buildings, though, you're looking at a higher capacity of well over 150 people. So when we're looking at that, I mean, the body just recently voted down that the navigation center wasn't to have more than 150 people. So I find it very ironic that now we want to shove all the homeless individuals in one facility that absolutely is way more than 150 people. So I want the assembly body to really consider what they're asking, because now they're being, it's now being remade on what we originally agreed, that we weren't going to go over 150 capacity because it was too much for any one facility to handle.
Thanks, Ms. Allard. So I just want to be super clear. The only sense of the body that we've gotten so far is Beans Cafe at 40 individuals. We have not gotten any other sense of the body regarding any of the other facilities, including any possible capacity. So I appreciate your comment, but we aren't there yet. Okay, Covenant House, I believe Mr. Constant had a question.
Yeah, thank you. My question was to the coalition or whoever has access to the HMIS. Does the census of needs match up with this as a location, or are we just going to be opening beds that don't actually meet the needs you have out there?
I think put another way, if we do 20 here, is that going to come out of the 350 or is that a separate bucket?
Yes, so the task force recommendations were for a multifaceted approach where they all come out of the presumed 350. So the transition age youth are counted in the 350 single adults we started from.
So put slightly another way, yes, there are that many or more out there that meet the entrance criteria to Covenant House.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Part of this conversation I was hoping to have would be a really transparent conversation between the task force, the administration, and the assembly, so that we could come up with a plan that we can announce this is the plan. I hope that we can still achieve that today. I also understand that the mayor's not here, and I respect that he is traveling and unavailable to be here. So I'm going to continue going to the administration. If they want to provide the same response, that's okay. Covenant House, any thoughts?
Again, Mr. Chairman, we're here to listen to the public. We want to hear perspective of everybody before we make the commitment on it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the assembly. Any thoughts on Covenant House? Any sense of the body? Thumbs up? Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. And sorry, folks on the phone, I can't see your thumbs up, so if you want to text me a thumbs up, that's cool too. Okay, so I am seeing thumbs up from everyone in person, so I'm going to go ahead and apologies. Ms. Zalatel, what was the capacity again at Covenant House?
25.
Okay, so 25. Let's fill that in. Okay, so our new need is yeah.
Mr. Trombley has a question for you.
Real quick, Mr. Chairman, I'm assuming that Beans, Covenant House, Brother Francis Shelter, and I'm sorry, I cannot read the bottom one. Okay, then we'll say those three. Those three have all been, the owners and users of that have all consented to all of this, correct?
I can say yes, but maybe
No, just a simple yes is fine.
Yes, and they put proposals forward, and they're in the attachments, and then the additional capacity of Brother Francis was already approved through appropriations that are approved.
Perfect. Just wanted to get that over. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so our new number is 285. So this next one's Brother Francis Shelter, and I think as Ms. Zalatel already alluded to, we already approved funding to increase the census at Brother Francis Shelter. So this would be an additional 20 that Brother Francis Shelter plans on turning on by October 1st, based on what we approved July 26th. So I don't know if we necessarily need to have a discussion on this one. We already approved it, so we're good. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill that one in with 20. Okay, so that's our new numbers at 265. Mini grants. So I am really going to rely on the administration on this one. If you could just tell us what's going on with mini grants, and if you were to put a number in here, what would you propose?
Through the chair, I will tell you right now we do have about $100,000 allocated for micro grants. With that being said, we received one application for shelter licensing that has not yet been approved, and so that program is underway, but there has not been any money expended, and I cannot give you a number on how many people will be housed during that time.
Okay. Any discussion from the assembly on that? Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm putting you in the queue, Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Johnson, for that information. Any, for the one that has applied for funding, would they be housing or sheltering folks who are in that low barrier population? Can you confirm that?
Through the chair to Ms. LaFrance, I don't have immediate details on that. We do know that preference is for families. Most of the time when we see churches that are willing to open their doors, it's to families. I don't foresee it being a lot of low barrier at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so seeing no other discussion. Oh, sorry, Mr. Constant. Yeah, you're in the queue. Go ahead.
Probably the same answer. Was there a number that was associated with the proposed application on location?
Sorry, it's very difficult to hear you, Mr. Constant. Can you restate that?
Was there a number of potential individuals to be served in that one location that was applied for?
So did you get the question? Okay.
Yes. Through the chair to Mr. Constant, I don't have immediate details on that. I can definitely look into who applied and how many people they were looking into serving, and I can get you that answer.
Thank you. All right, so for now, I think it's probably behooves us to leave that as blank because we want to have a definite plan. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on then to the much more difficult discussions. We're going to start with the Golden Lion. If the coalition or task force can speak to that briefly.
Thank you. So on the Golden Lion, we recommended using this as housing. The municipality has access to $8 million in emergency rental assistance with another potential of $4 million. If individuals are offered housing at the Golden Lion, which would mean a landlord-tenant situation, a lease, it could be for, it doesn't always require a year, it could be a month-to-month lease, then we can leverage those emergency rental assistance dollars. And the reason that this was put forward is we think a variety of approaches. As we mentioned, we were really focused on the solution. The solution is housing, and we've just seen such great success at the guest house. This would be something very similar in its replication. That's 85 units, and so depending on roommates, we could go up to 170. What we saw at the guest house was initial roommate choice was about 60%. So 60% of units selected to have a roommate.
Thank you. Okay, so just like normal, we're going to go to the administration, then the assembly. So I'm going to add for these other ones, I'm going to add a question. Besides initial thoughts, I also, for the sake of transparency, so that we can come up with a realistic plan for the assembly and the public, is the administration going to say no to any of these options? So starting with the Golden Lion, go ahead.
Sure. In regards to all of these options, I think the most important thing is for the administration to listen to the public on all of these options, because we know that there's going to be, we've seen that there's controversy on some of these things, or may not be on others, but I think it's a little bit premature for us to say yes or no to something without listening to people.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on then to the assembly, starting with Mr. Constant.
Thank you. My only point on this is that I think that the coalition itself spoke very eloquently to the idea that this is best served as housing because of some concerns about narrow readings of restrictions that were put on the ordinance that secured the purpose. We could avoid some controversy, clearly not all, if we identify this as housing. And I think it's a very clear and direct and elegant solution, even if it's temporary in the sense that there are arguments about its potential condemnation some years down the road.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'll express first that I'm a little bit concerned and frustrated that the administration isn't able to have, I was hoping we could sort of negotiate an actual plan today. And so I'm sort of wondering what the steps are that we get to a plan by Monday. And it might just be, ultimately the mayor chose to close the Sullivan and put people in Centennial Park. It's his decision. He can put people wherever, and we really can't stop him. But we also are going to be asked to fund something, right? So how do we get from point A to point B? I thought that's what we were going to do today. And but it sounds like the administration is not prepared to have that actual conversation where we say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. They can correct me if I'm mistaken on that. Maybe they can get authority to do that in the next 10 minutes. I will say on the Golden Lion, so I'll say several of us, Mr. Solt, Ms. LaFrance, and I took a tour of the Sockeye Inn a couple days ago, and it, a very good facility, has housing, people with complex care needs, and relatively little impact on the community around it, similar to the guest house in that sense. And so I think housing is definitely a good option where people have the ability to feel a little more settled. I will say that I think we want to be a little bit conservative with that number. So if you have 60%, you think 60% doubled up roommates, then that gives you, 136 or so. But what we saw at the Sockeye was that they always had a couple of rooms open for people that had to quarantine, in some cases for exposure to COVID or whatever else. And then just in general, you want to have a little bit of a swing space. And so I think to be a little more conservative, I think the number should be like closer to 125 or 130 if we're talking about housing gold line. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so all right. Before I go into the queue, I want to address something that Mr. Dunbar brought up. So obviously, and I think Mr. Trombley probably wants to as well. So I was also hoping that we would be able to have a little bit more information from the administration's perspective. That said, I think it's incumbent upon us to at least put something down, and we're doing that. We're literally putting down numbers on paper. It would be great if the administration could provide their feedback on a very quick turnaround basis, because the goal is still to get appropriations out to the public and the body so we know what the agreed upon plan is by Friday, and then we vote on Monday. So did you want to speak to that, Mr. Trombley?
I did, Mr. Chairman. The administration is not at all trying to be combative, not one bit. One of the things that we've learned in our time in 15 months in office is that it's very important on these very controversial issues to make sure that we have public buy-in. It's important that we listen to the people, and it's important that we take the time to do it right. And so I think whatever's come up with in this body and is put forward to the public, having a public meeting with a robust public process, I don't think we can ever go wrong with that. So for us to come in and say, oh yeah, we agree with 400 people at this location, 50 people at that location, is very challenging for us because we want to make sure that what we're doing, that all affected communities understand that this is going to be going on in their community and that we can listen to them.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say that I agree, and I think what we've heard in the emails is that there's a lot of public support for the Golden Lion, and probably a lot, maybe some for the Sullivan, and then it sort of decreases after that. But I guess my question is for the administration, if we weren't having this meeting today, we are 9 days out from closing the Centennial Park. Where would you propose those folks go? Because I guess that's my basic question. You're not going to have the shelter tutor in Elmore done in time. You've taken the rec centers off the table. So where actually would the folks go if we didn't do this in 9 days? What's the administration's sort of plan?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, the administration recognizes that, again, that this is very controversial and that all locations are. We understand that the Assembly authorized a task force to look at multiple locations, and so we were waiting to see what those locations were. Those locations have been identified, and now that they've been identified, they should be vetted in a very public process. So I can't deal with hypotheticals. What would we do if this had not happened or that not happened? We have to deal. We're going to deal with what is reality, and that is the very real reality in front of us. Is this task force recommendation? So once we understand the public's position on this, we'll be happy to support or oppose based on what we hear from the public.
Thanks. Okay, so we are quickly running out of time, so I hope that we don't get stuck in this conversation, because I don't know if it's necessarily going to be helpful. So I'm going to go through the queue, and hopefully we can focus on Golden Lion. Mr. Boland?
Yeah, I would just like to state my support for using the Golden Lion as housing, and I appreciate the administration wants to listen, and I think, I wish I had a way of taking the census in the room, because I feel like a lot of folks here would rather use the Golden Lion and ISO.
Thank you. Mr. Salt?
So through the chair, ditto to that statement, thank you. On the Golden Lion, definitely want to see it as an option used. I would like Jessica maybe at some point, not now, legal opinion, make sure we're good to use that facility with how the funds were allocated versus how we're going to use it. Make sure that box is checked and we just looked at it. Also, Mr. Dunbar, I think it was 263, so depending on what number we put down for the Golden Lion, will initially be there or close to it. And then I think after today, maybe help facilitate this process is a look at what we have on a timeline of other facilities that could come online, such as First Presbyterian's option. So there's a navigation center that are being discussed, but not ready today. Because that also shows we have the capacity down the road, like Ms. Alatel said, as we slide into this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to first confirm with Ms. Alatel that the proposed use for the Golden Lion is permanent housing and is not emergency shelter or any kind of shelter in any capacity.
It is housing. When you say permanent, it's leased housing, I guess is how I would put it. And I do want to take the opportunity to say that the complex care shelter is shelter at the old Sockeye Inn, and so that operation is different. And so there are different considerations. So I just wanted to raise that as well. But yes, leased housing.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I just want to make a quick comment because I held back earlier. And that I would urge my colleagues to support using the Golden Lion in this capacity. The options blur into each other, and obviously we can see as we get further down the list, we get closer to Dempsey and Benboki, and I want to declare that, like Mr. Rowland, I've had firsthand experience of the positive impacts of hockey programs, especially for youth. I've played many hours in Dempsey in the Adult and Women's League hockey program. Thank you, Jeannie Carey, for all your hard work. And I also just want to provide some assurance, to the community here that we're hopefully going to stop very soon and achieve the numbers we need. And that, to the administration's point about a plan, I appreciate that you are here and that this is going to be used as a basis to do outreach to the community, because it's hard to do outreach without a plan when you just have recommendations. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, next we have Mr. Constant.
Yes, thank you. So I am a little bit concerned in hearing from the administration right now, and I understand why the position of the administration is we're going to wait to hear options and hear input from everybody and try not to do anything that makes anybody mad. But I'm also hearing from members of the various activist groups, hockey and otherwise, who've been meeting with the administration, who are saying that the mayor is telling them that this is the Assembly's decision. And so I want to just note that there's a little bit of dissonance between the messages, and that through this process, I'm sure we can get to the point where we come to alignment. But when the messages that are going out aren't aligning, it makes it hard to know which one is the actual message.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I think today we are going to do our job, and then we will see how the administration responds. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Chair. I'll make it quick. It really sounds like to me, while I'm listening to the community and I'm listening to members of the Assembly, that we are actually pitting two communities against each other. You either give us the Golden Lion, or we're going to go after the Benboki and the Dempsey. That is not something we as a city elected officials should be doing, and pitting community members against each other. After the navigation center has been swiped from the mayor, I now lean on the side that no government facility should be used at all. And the Golden Lion is owned by the municipality. And the mayor has that call. And he also has the call, according to Title 29, on the Benboki and the Dempsey. All that being put in there, we need to utilize the type of facilities within our community and stop pitting community members against community members. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Just to clarify, as folks can see on the spreadsheet, the way that we are having this conversation is as follows. Golden Lion, Sullivan Arena, Egan Convention Center, Denina Convention Center, Dempsey Ice Arena, Boki Ice Arena. So to echo what Ms. LaFrance stated, we should get to zero well before we even talk about the Dempsey and the Boki.
Mr. Chair,
that's our goal today.
I move to extend by 10 minutes.
I will accept that. Thank you. Is there any opposition to the extension? Okay, seeing none. All right, so we have 125 as a number. I want to go to the task force. What was the number that you recommended?
85 to 136. 85 represents one single adult per room, 136 takes into account a 60% roommate rate.
Thank you. All right, so then we have quite a range here, 85, 125, 136. Is there any sense of the body? What number should we put there?
Through the chair, desperate times, desperate measures, 136.
Any, opposition to 136? Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was thinking that if we went with 50% expected roommates, it would get to a number around 120. I think that might be more realistic. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I was going to say exactly the same thing, 120, which is half the rooms and so on.
Okay, so what I'm going to try to do to speed up this conversation, and actually, I wasn't paying attention. How long did we extend for?
20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay, thanks. Okay, so to help speed up this conversation, then I will ask 120, sort of thumbs up. Is there a sense of the body on 120? Okay, all right, let's go ahead and put in 120 in there. So that takes us to 145 as the new number. All right, next discussion is around Sullivan Arena. Task Force?
Hi, thank you. The Sullivan Arena wasn't originally on the recommendation list, but you'll notice with the updates, the Sullivan Arena was added back in. I do just want to bring up everything that everyone else has brought up about re-traumatization, but recognize that there were a lot of downfalls to using the Sullivan Arena in the first place. Dark corners, inaccessibility for disabilities, so the task force would recommend that if the Sullivan Arena is being considered, that we talk about capacity and that we talk about only utilizing the mezzanine level of the Sullivan Arena to be able to allow accessibility, any people experiencing homelessness with mobility issues to be able to access.
Can you give us a number?
Yeah, no more than 200.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn to the administration and then the assembly. So administration, same thing. You can give the same response if you want.
Through the chair, I'm going to continue to listen. I'm taking good notes, and I'm going to hopefully go back and have an answer for you soon.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the administration. It's not on whether or not you accept this, but is there anyone here from the applicant who gets back, or anyone that is familiar with this facility? Because I've heard really conflicting reports. I've heard people that have done walkthroughs that say basically it's intact. It could be turned back on for use, potentially for skating by the end of October. And I've heard other people say, no, it's going to be significantly longer. My budget co-chair and I offered about $1.75 million last week to try for repairs, but we didn't get any sense from the administration of actually how much damage we were talking about. So can you give us a sense of what actually is damaged and, what was the plan? Imagine that we aren't going to go back in there with as a homeless facility. When could the Sullivan be turned on for ice use or any other kind?
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, I can get you complete answers from Director Saxton Shearer of MNO. I do know that the minimalist amount of repair was around $700,000, and I believe a lot of that work was underway. And then at max, we were told it was about $2.7 to $3 million, and that was to get it back fully operational. I do want to say that there was some historic damage even prior to the pandemic with the earthquake happening, and so those repairs were also on the list of things to complete.
Yeah, I just want to say this. This is not directly the administration. We got a lot of emails, and some of the emails have said the Sullivan is destroyed. The Sullivan was destroyed by what happened in the last 2 years. There definitely were significant damages and cleaning that needed to be done, but I've talked to a number of people who have used the Sullivan or been involved in management of the Sullivan. It sounds like a lot of the damages happened before, with earthquake or just with sort of the facility had gone to disrepair. And so hopefully we can get it restored relatively quickly. And I'm not, we're going to have a conversation about whether or not we, again, use this as a facility for people experiencing homelessness. I am not, totally opposed to that, but it is also the case that I think with not too much money, we could get the Sullivan back open as a revenue-generating facility. And so it's something we at least need to consider. That being said, I mean, clearly there's more support from what we have seen from the public. There is more support for using the Sullivan than there is the other two ice arenas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. So the next 3 facilities on the list are additional facilities in North Anchorage District. And the 2 facilities that are above this one are in such a condition that they have fresh carpet, they have multiple users, they have $1 million art, and then you have the Sullivan that is continuing in a deteriorated fashion at this point. And while I hate to suggest that we add an additional site into the North District, because we've again added the guest house, we've added the sockeye, we've added the navigation center, always the downtown. To me, from a harm reduction perspective, the Sullivan Arena is the least harmful option. I think, though, in keeping with not being hypocritical, as has been an accusation levied by a member, that the 150-person cap has to exist at this place too, if it's chosen.
Thanks. And just to clarify, we're actually looking at a difference of 145. I mean, we could decide just to do 150, but we don't even need to do 150 there.
No, and I get that, but I just want to make sure it's asserted up front that that's not intended to be the place where 250 to 500 people end up at the end of the winter.
Thanks. Mr. Boland?
Thank you. Yeah, I would second the other member from North Anchorage. There's a lot to unpack here. It is downtown has really had to struggle as in ways with being the place where a lot of these resources exist, for better, for worse. I would recommend let's put in 150 at the Sullivan Arena, and however we can do that, mezzanine or cordoning areas off, or however we can be creative without trying to minimize costs, because I think the dialogue with the hockey community who's here today, a couple things have stood out to me. We have a facility that already needs repairs. Why would we subject other municipal-owned facilities to that? We have to weigh that into the cost as well. I would support moving forward with the Sullivan.
Thanks. Any other discussion? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
So I continue to feel that 350 isn't the right number that we have to get to by October 1st. I think it's a lower number, and then we can ramp up to November or December, maybe at 350, because I do think there are other housing options that hopefully will come online in the next month. If that's the case, we could limit the Sullivan Arena to a smaller number, like 100 people, for example, and I just don't think the difference actually exists based on the data we've gotten from the coalition. So then we could take all the other facilities off the list and keep the size of the Sullivan facility relatively small. And I continue to think that smaller facilities are better than larger facilities where you have a lot more problems with security and a lot more problems with different communities coming in contact with each other that are perhaps harmful for each other. And so I guess I would advocate for less than 150 people in the Sullivan Arena. And then I just don't think the 350 was the right number to start with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I guess my response to that is I appreciate that. Having sat through the task force meetings and understanding where they came with that assumptions, I do believe that we should plan for 350. In addition, understanding that we don't know where the administration is going to weigh in on this, I think we should present a plan at 350, and maybe the administration will come back with a different number, with a different plan. But I think we should at least provide as many options as possible for the administration to consider. And then in addition, there are just too many unknowns about when housing projects might be online, and too many unknowns about inflow. So I think it's incumbent on us to plan for 350, and that would be what I suggest. Mr. Constant?
Did you just call me, sir?
I did, yes.
So, I would speak against the idea of reducing the number at Sullivan. There's one other factor that hasn't really been considered in all of this, and it's that since we have had no municipal shelter, we've effectively ended abatement processes. And I can tell you from a walk through downtown last night, there were dozens of people sleeping out who we don't have any legal right to tell them to move to shelter because we don't have shelter. And so some excess capacity outside of the demand is wise so that we can, when we have locations that are becoming problematic, have a way to intervene.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, I did hear the number, I believe 150 tossed out. So I guess getting a sense of the body, 150 at the Sullivan. Mr. France. Sorry, I'm just doing thumbs up. 150 at the Sullivan?
Yes.
Okay.
Thumbs up.
All right. Then, obviously this doesn't represent a vote. We're going to vote on Monday. And amendments and anything could happen on Monday. But let's go ahead and put in 150. Which actually takes us to a surplus of 5. So I think we have achieved our goal of providing 350 beds for our unsheltered population. I'm going to go ahead and turn to the task force just to confirm this. Do we have a plan? Will it work?
Yes, you have enough beds there. I did also want to highlight that the Sullivan does have capacity for a warming tent, and I would recommend that that be part of the plan from the start so that we're not left scrambling when the weather does get cold enough to need a warming tent.
Thank you. I guess to the body. Yes, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to point out, not only do we have a plan that doesn't involve taking any facilities that impact youth hockey.
Thank you. So, to the body, do we have a plan? Obviously, we're going to take a vote on Monday. But for now, do we have a sense that we have a plan? Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly agree with this version of the plan. Can you speak a little bit more about, practically speaking, what the resolution will look like on Monday? And so it's not a public hearing item, and is it just an appropriation based on estimates from the coalition, or what exactly are we voting on Monday?
Yeah, correct. We're going to be voting on appropriations, contract agreements, because of the need to be speedy to meet our legal obligation. This will all likely be sole sourced contracts. So that'll be before us on Monday with dollar amounts, and I hope that we'll be able to vote and get the work done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Soul?
So just to build on something to share that Mr. Dunbar said earlier, we have a plan. There is capacity that's coming online potentially in the future that may even alleviate the need for the Sullivan and allow us to get in there and start making those repairs to get the Wolverines and UAA and anyone else a venue at some point. So just keep that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I think we can success. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. There was a whole subject of conversation we didn't get into today, and that is issues related to the potential navigation center here in Homework. Yes. And so, while I'm not interested in opening that can for conversation at this late time, I'm hoping that the administration hears that what I want to see is, I think we've submitted some questions, what have we spent, who has been doing the work, and where are we going if we get to approval of that. And I know that question isn't before us for roughly a month, but it takes time to sort through that kind of stuff. So I would offer, after Monday, the immediate pivot is to answering those questions.
Thanks. I guess just to respond to that briefly, yes, the Navigation Center wasn't on this agenda by design because we needed to focus on October 1st. But as I understand it, there is a planned work session that's on our calendars and on the administration's calendars for October 7th, where we will have the first foray into the deliberation. The questions haven't been sent to the administration yet, so I hope to get that done by later this week. I've been busy with today. I hope to have a good sense of things October 7th. There's the possibility of doing a second work session if we feel like we need it before the vote on October 25th on the NAV Center contract amendment. Okay, with that, I'm going to provide some brief closing comments. I think it's safe to say, just based off of reactions from the public, what we've seen in our emails, the assembly, that we have a plan. Of course, there's a caveat. We gotta wait and see what the mayor says. But we have a plan. I want to thank everyone for helping us to get to this important milestone. To reiterate the next steps, documents will be coming out on Friday that will allow the administration to implement this plan. We will be voting on these documents at the special meeting on Monday. Again, thank you to the task force for your amazing work. Thank you to the administration for participating today in the capacity that you could. And thank you to the public for engaging in this process. With that, this meeting is adjourned.